an island the size of a small park. A gold-domed building that looks like a temple. Private jets, and a mansion with rooms that would never be entered in public. For decades, people whispered about what happened there. Then files, logs, and court records began to leak, and the whispers grew into headlines. He was born in 1953 and raised in a working-class neighborhood. He began his professional life as a teacher, then moved into finance, a world that would lift him quickly into exclusive circles. Epstein's rise was not announced by flashy IPOs or public filings. Instead, it was quiet, private, and opportunistic. He developed a reputation as a discreet money manager, someone who could operate behind closed doors. Over the years, he acquired properties, a Manhattan townhouse, a Palm Beach estate, a secluded island, homes in Paris and New Mexico. He donated to institutions, attended galas, and sat in rooms with philanthropic names on the plaques. But the financial records available to the public never fully explained the origin of some of his wealth, and questions about his true business model followed him. Those questions became urgent when victims began to step forward. Court filings and victim statements sketched a pattern: recruitment, travel, and isolated spaces where abuse could occur away from public eyes. At the center of that pattern was power, not only money, but connections, political figures, business leaders, and people who moved comfortably across national borders. And yet for years, Epstein avoided full federal scrutiny, often shielded by legal tactics and private agreements. In July 2019, federal prosecutors charged him with sex trafficking of minors in New York and Florida, charges that summarized years of alleged conduct. This section is not about wealth alone. It is about how wealth built privacy and how privacy enabled harm. To understand what happened on the island and elsewhere, we must look both at the man and the circle he created. Little St. James sits southeast of St. Thomas, a small private patch of land that Epstein bought in the late 1990s. On photographs, it appears idyllic: azure water, coral rock, manicured lawns. But those images hide infrastructure, walls, and access points designed for privacy. Epstein invested in construction, multiple villas, guest quarters, service buildings, staff housing, a helipad, and private docks that shielded arrivals from public view. The so-called temple, a blue and white gold-domed structure, became a focal point of reporting and speculation. Journalists, investigators, and satellite analysts reconstructed the compound using public records, photographs, and court exhibits. Survivors described pathways from the dock to villas, stairways leading to secluded terraces, and rooms that could be locked off from the rest of the world. Workers on the island later told reporters about extensive landscaping, buried service lines, and construction that suggested a deliberate effort to segregate public-facing areas from private ones. These accounts fed online speculation about subterranean tunnels and hidden cells. Some contractors described service corridors and buried utilities, which in remote compounds is not unusual. But other accounts hinted at more secretive passages and private access routes. Official, verifiable mapping of underground features is limited in the public record. Where documentation exists, it rarely matches the bold conspiracy claims spread in forums and social media. Still, the combination of secrecy, staffed privacy, and carefully staged arrival points made the island an effective place to keep activities out of sight. They named drivers, security staff, and pilots who moved people in and out with itinerary precision. Flight manifests and logs later provided crucial documentary traces. And yet, despite cameras and guarded perimeters, survivors say what they experienced there could not be hidden forever. And once they spoke, those paper traces became central to the investigation. The pattern of recruitment repeated across years and locations. Young women and girls described being approached in public places, malls, beauty schools, social events, or through friends. Some were promised modeling opportunities. Some were told they would meet a wealthy patron who could change their lives. Often, the first meetings were framed as innocent. A friendly introduction, a camera, a short modeling shoot. But the pattern deepened. A recruiter would invite a girl to a private location with promises of money and better opportunities. Payment often followed, small at first, then larger amounts with an unspoken expectation. At times, other young women who had been recruited were used to normalize the situation, to show that this was what others did and that it was part of the lifestyle. Survivors describe emotional manipulation, affection used as reward, then withdrawal as punishment. In some cases, explicit threats followed, or hints that speaking out would trigger consequences for family, employment, or reputation. Grooming also included travel. A girl might be flown to a glamorous destination, shown expensive hotels, introduced to influential people, and then the line between a social scene and an exploitative setup blurred. Once the victim was isolated, whether in a villa, a private jet, or a secluded room, the abuser's control tightened. Money helped, but control came from dependency, shame, and the systematic removal of outside support. One consistent theme in victim accounts is the use of normal social scenes as cover, a lavish party here, a quiet dinner there, to make abuse seem like it was part of a glamorous lifestyle, not an assault. Another consistent theme. Recruitment often involved other women who were given incentives, sometimes gifts, sometimes money, to recruit peers. Defense strategies for victims were limited. Isolation, financial need, fear of stigma, and the sense that no one in power would believe them. Over time, many survivors did find the courage to come forward, and their combined narratives created a map of how the trafficking network functioned. Those narratives, corroborated by phone records, flight logs, and witness testimony, made the scope of the abuse clear to investigators, even if key questions about other participants remained unresolved. The investigation that began in 2005 in Palm Beach is critical to understanding how the system failed many victims. A single parent reported her daughter's encounter with a man who paid for sex with a minor. Local police followed up and gathered multiple statements. Patterns emerged, and investigators identified a suspect who matched the description. The case moved up the chain to state prosecutors and then to federal investigators who drafted an indictment. By 2007, a federal indictment draft listed numerous potential counts and named multiple victims. But instead of full federal prosecution, a plea arrangement was negotiated in 2008. Epstein pleaded guilty to state solicitation charges and received a sentence that many viewed as extraordinarily lenient. The clarity of the public record on this deal was limited. Prosecutors negotiated terms that kept many details sealed and left victims with little notice and fewer rights. The secrecy of the non-prosecution agreement became a flashpoint years later, after journalists exposed the deal's terms and the role of federal officials in approving it. Critics argued that the agreement violated the spirit of victim protection laws and shielded a figure who posed an ongoing danger. The Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility later reviewed the conduct of prosecutors involved in the 2008 arrangement, and the review, reporting, and public pressure changed how the public and some institutions viewed the case. For survivors, the deal felt like betrayal. For the public, it raised urgent questions about prosecutorial discretion and transparency. And for investigators who continued to pursue additional leads, the 2008 agreement became an obstacle that required new approaches and renewed scrutiny. Over the next decade, as victims and journalists pushed for more transparency, sealed court records were challenged, civil suits were filed, and pressure mounted to reopen what many call a closed matter. Renewed interest, new evidence, and investigative reporting culminated in Epstein's arrest in July 2019 on federal sex trafficking charges. The Manhattan indictment painted a picture of a long-running scheme, with allegations spanning years and involving multiple locations. Investigators executed search warrants, seized materials, and sought to build a case that would stand in federal court. But before the case could proceed to trial, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Epstein was found dead in his jail cell in New York on Saturday.
Officials concluded the death was suicide, but procedural failures, including camera malfunctions and lapses in cell checks, produced a storm of criticism. The death closed the criminal case against Epstein, but it opened new legal and public inquiries. How could a man in federal custody die under such circumstances? What did the seized materials show? Who else might be implicated? In the months that followed, civil suits advanced, documents were litigated, and pressure grew to make records public. One resulting prosecution targeted Ghislaine Maxwell, alleged by prosecutors to have materially assisted in recruiting and grooming victims for Epstein. At trial, multiple survivors testified about Maxwell's role, and the jury found her guilty on counts related to conspiracy and transportation of minors for sexual activity. Her conviction in 2021 and sentencing in 2022 to 2 decades behind bars was significant. It placed criminal accountability on an associate who survivors said enabled Epstein's conduct. But even Maxwell's conviction answered some questions and raised others, especially about the full extent of the network and the identities of all who were involved. Several civil settlements and ongoing litigation continued to peel back layers of the operation, producing more documents and depositions that added detail to the public record. And yet, as new files surfaced, so did denials and attempts to contextualize or explain mentions in logs and records, producing a complex public conversation about guilt, association, and responsibility. This story is most of all about survivors, about lives interrupted, youth stolen, and families altered forever. Paper trails and flight logs matter because they create traces that investigators, journalists, and historians can follow. But documents are tools, not verdicts. They must be read carefully, corroborated, contextualized, and tested in court. Accountability has come in important forms: criminal convictions, civil settlements, and public exposure. But many survivors still report a sense of incomplete justice. The public response to Epstein's world also produced institutional changes: more rigorous victim notification rules, increased scrutiny of prosecutorial conduct, and reforms in how sealed agreements are reviewed. If this documentary leaves one impression, let it be this: power and wealth make secrecy easy. Survivors make truth possible. Listen to survivors. Follow the documents. Demand transparency. And if you or someone you know needs help, reach out to verified local hotlines and survivor organizations. Resources are in the end credits.